Welcome to Virtual Humans, Lecture 8.1, Vertex-Based Clothing, Part 3, Learning a Model. So we've seen how to use this vertex-based representation of clothing in order to perform registration, in order to do 3D reconstruction from images. Now we will see how to learn a model of clothing. This means like a model that allows us to generalize to new poses, see how the clothing deforms according to pose. Until now, we assume that clothing does not change, but this is not really true. And also how to have a model that can allow us to control the geometry of clothing. So this is what we mean by a model. So the first model of clothing that generalizes to new shapes, new poses, and new styles was the paper called TaylorNet. And this paper is learning these clothing deformations using physics-based simulation. So the basic idea is to run physics-based simulation to obtain training data and then learn a model. So why would you do that? Well, physics-based simulation requires specialized software, a lot of expertise, and it often breaks if the parameters are not well tuned, or if there's like some unexpected intersections. And also, more importantly, perhaps, is that it's not trivial to differentiate these models. And that's because like the physics simulation depends on the previous frame. And if you want to obtain the dependency of like, what happened in the first frame, like to see how this affects in the 100th frame, you have to propagate this over time. And this is not trivial. So if you learn a deep learning model, like you will obtain a model that is easy to use, that is differentiable, and allows to produce control. And as long as it's generalizing, it's not going to break. So that's the idea. So first of all, let's look at which representation we use here. So we saw that we can apply these displacements, or we can cut the mesh into pieces in order to separate the different garments. And this is the representation we use here, which is based on this cloth cap representation. So here we want to learn a function that produces clothing geometry as a function of the pose, shape, and the style, right? So this is what we show here, that the basic idea is that for one shape, you have one style. And if you change the style, like for example, the t-shirt gets larger here, right? Now, the exact same t-shirt on a bigger shape should look smaller, right? It should be tighter. And this is what this model is capable of doing. Notice this is the same t-shirt as here, and now here's much tighter. And you can also change the style, and allowing you to, for example, like change the length of the t-shirt. And you, of course, want to generalize to different poses of people. So how do you do this? Well, first of all, you need to generate the data, and to obtain like a diversity in terms of the geometry of clothing, you need like different 3D geometries of clothing. And for this, we use these garments of the multi-garment net, which we covered in the previous work, which were obtained from 3D scans of people in clothing by segmenting them and unposing them. So you have to first get the 3D scans of people, segment them out, and unpose them, bring them into alignment, the same way as we did for the simple model. Then you need to run physics simulation on the garments by varying the shape of the person underneath. So you can apply this garment to different people, change the shape, and run physics simulation in order to drape the model, like the garments, onto the body, to simulate how this garment would actually look on a person. Then you want to build like variation. And for this, you can do PCA on these garments in order to, have a space of possible garment geometries. And you need to do this for every single garment that you're going to model. So you have to divide the space into, t-shirts which are short sleeve, t-shirts that are long sleeve, or sleeveless, and so on. So this is a categorical model. You don't have a single model for all possible garments in the world. You have one model for every type of garment topology and garment cut as well. So then the style parameters are controlled with PCA coefficients gamma, right? Which control like this, like the sleeve length and the how wide a t-shirt is, for example, or like some pants are. So now you want to build like a model that also generalizes to new poses. And for this, you need to see how the garment deforms according to different poses. So what you can do is to apply this garment into a canonical pose and then do physics-based simulation by creating a motion sequence, a synthetic motion sequence, by interpolating poses from the pose data set of the simple model. So you will consider these poses and interpolate the poses over time, and then do physics-based simulation in order to obtain like the garment deforming over time. And this will allow us to produce like different pairs of 3D poses and the garment on that pose with the correct deformation. You can also vary the shape smoothly along the path such that, you know, the physics simulation needs to adapt both to the pose and to the shape at the same time to obtain more variation. This is one way of making the network generalize better. And you need to do this for multiple styles, like t-shirts, pants, short pants, long pants, and so on. So this, and also for different variation of the PCA parameters for each of these categories. So this creates a variation over pose, shape, and style. And then once you've obtained all these simulations, you need to unpose the data and learn the model in this unposed space for the same reasons as we did before. So how do we learn this model? Well, the first thing that you should try is the easiest thing first, right? And okay, the easiest thing might be a linear model, but this is not going to work very well because the clothing deformations are not linear in the pose. There's like non-rigid effects. So you might try like a two-layer neural network with a multi-layer perceptron, for example, or a three-layer neural network. So you give the parameters of the pose, the shape, and the style, encoding the particular geometry of the garment. And you have to learn one of these models, one of these neural networks for every type of garment. So for every, like for t-shirts, for long sleeve, for pants, and for skirts, and so on, right? And so you learn a mapping that goes from the pose, shape, gamma, to these m times 3 vertices of the garment. Now, will this work? Well, the empirical observation is that MLP generalizes well to new poses, so that's good news, and this worked better than what we expected, but it produces like overly smooth results when it's trained over multiple shapes and styles. So the hypothesis here is that this is happening because like high-frequency wrinkle patterns vary a lot depending on the shape and style of the same pose. So you might have the same pose, but if you change the style or you change the shape, the wrinkle patterns will change a lot. And it's going to be very difficult for the network to basically combine like how different styles and like the garment deformation for different styles for a given pose. It's going to be difficult for the network to figure out what's the pattern there. Maybe there is no pattern because like if you change the style, the wrinkle patterns for a given pose will be completely different. So if this is the case, it makes sense to only combine, like to know how it will generalize for a new pose, to only combine style shapes that are similar. And this is the basic idea of this work, which is called TaylorNet. So essentially now, like the deformation is going to be predicted using a mixture model. So let me define a new variable to make the notation a bit easier. So this is this phi over here, which is a pair of a tuple of shape parameters and style parameters. Again, style parameters are for a given garment category. For example, like for t-shirts, it would determine how wide the t-shirt is or how long the sleeves are, but it would not go from, for example, like short sleeve to long sleeve, right? So now, like what we're going to do is we're going to predict for a given pose and shape style, right? We're going to predict like with a single MLP, this low frequency version, right, which is going to look something like this, right, which does not have like the high frequency patterns, but it has like the overall deformation of the clothing. And now in order to model like these high frequency patterns, what we're going to do is a mixture model. So a mixture model is like linearly combining the predictions of different shape style models. So we're going to have like a series of prototypes, one for every shape style prototype. So one prototype is a pair of shape and garment style parameters, and we're going to have k prototypes. And now to predict the output, we're going to have these kernels that measure how close my particular shape style query is to each of the shape style prototypes. And this is going to be this kernel that weights higher if the distance is smaller and weights lower if the distance is higher. And so this is going to be a weight that multiplies this prediction for this shape style prototype. And this is going to linearly combine. And we're going to have a very narrow kernel such that we only add up the contributions of very similar looking shape style patterns. And this will allow us to only combine similar shape style patterns and not smooth out all the wrinkle patterns predicted by different models. Now that's the basic idea. So basically here you have this mixture of high frequencies with very narrow band kernels and this low frequency, and you can add up these two things in order to obtain this unposed wrinkled t-shirt, which you can then skin using the simple model. And this allows you to obtain this post character, including the wrinkle patterns. So yeah, so here we use this idea of using this is called a mixture model, right? Because you have a mixture of models. So let me show you some results. So this is some generalization to new poses. And what is quite nice is that this is trained with static poses, these poses that I showed you before. But the model like is capable of predicting a temporally coherent prediction. So there's no temporal dynamics here. It's just for every pose, shape, and style, it predicts an output. And of course, it would make sense to add the temporal dynamics, but it's also useful to have like this quasi-static effect. So for a given pose, what are the wrinkle patterns? Because for example, if you're estimating human shape and clothing from a single image, you might have only one frame and you might not have the video sequence. So that's why this is useful. All right. So now let's look at how we generalize this to different styles. So here we're going to keep the shape fixed and change the style. So notice how the style changed, right? So the length of the t-shirt, I hope you noticed, changed as a function of the gamma parameter. And notice how the fit on the body also changes. So the network is predicting different pose-based deformations based on these different shape styles. And you can also keep the style fixed and change the shape, as you can see here. So as the body gets bigger, then the t-shirt gets tighter on the body, as one should expect. And yeah, so this generalizes to different garments. You need to build one of these models for every garment type, so for every garment category. So we had one for skirts, one for long sleeves, one for t-shirts, one for short pants, and one for long pants. And so this is perhaps a disadvantage that this is not a compact model, but on the other hand, it makes sense to separate these models for every garment because the deformation patterns might be completely different depending on the garment category. And what is nice is that it produces this layering on top of the body, which, as we noted before, is advantageous for a number of applications. And you can see that you can obtain quite realistic clothing deformation results using this relatively straightforward model based on MLPs or a mixture of MLPs. So here's a demonstration of how the model changes when we change the shape and we keep the style fixed. And notice that the wrinkle patterns change smoothly, and all of a sudden they switch, and that's because of the mixture model. And this might happen when the mixture modes change over time. All right, so this is TaylorNet is a fairly simple model that that is available, like the code is available, and if you want to play with it, I suggest that you just download the code and play with it and with the data. So this was a paper from CBPR 2020, and I think it's still useful, but there's other papers that are more sophisticated, for example, like SNAC, which is a self-supervised version of TaylorNet. So in TaylorNet and other models, like the idea is to generate data with physics-based simulation and then train. In SNAC, the idea is to use physics simulation within the training. So essentially, that's what other people do, right? Including TaylorNet, like they have like this physics simulation, reconstruction, and then basically you have like an input, parameters, and a neural network that breaks the output, right? And producing this data is time consuming. And in SNAC, like what they realize is that you can have the physics simulation within the training loop such that you have this self-supervised loss, such that the neural network is consistent with the laws of physics. So this allows like self-supervised training and like faster training. It's probably more tricky to implement this pipeline because you need to have the physics simulation in the loop of the training. And I can imagine that this is not so easy to do, but it allows you to reduce the training time from 17 hours to about 2 hours. And the inference is about the same. All right, so then we have, for example, like from Meta and Facebook, we have a model that is also based on vertex displacements and a representation that is similar to cloth cap. So here they basically obtained multi-layered registrations using a loop, using a pipeline that is similar to cloth cap, where, yeah, they estimate these different garments layered on top of the body. And then using these multi-layered registrations, they train a neural network that essentially it predicts the geometry and as well as the view-dependent texture from this input. So essentially, they have a VIE that hold on, give me 1 second. Exactly. So they have two networks, one to predict the body under clothing. So this is as a function of the skeletal pose and the facial key points. And then they have another network that predicts the clothing on top of the body. And this is based on a VIE, and the VIE encodes both jointly this texture, view-dependent texture, and the geometry. So with this latent code, like they push this through the decoder and obtain a view-dependent texture and this unposed geometry, which then can be posed using the simple model or an LBS model. So the thing with the BA is that you train the encoder and decoder jointly, and then basically at test time, you just drop the encoder and then you just can sample from the latent code in order to produce samples from the distribution. Okay, so these are like two examples of other works that are based on vertex-based displacements and on this like idea of layering the clothing using displacements. I just wanted to show you these more recent results and notice that these are subject-specific models, but still like the quality can be quite compelling, as you can see here. So this is vertex-based displacements, and the good thing is that it allows you to have control. They are compatible with graphics pipelines. We have things into perfect correspondence, so we can do easy things like transferring clothing from one body to another, changing the texture, things like this. However, the main problem is that for complex topologies, we're going to have a problem because, as we've seen, these models are based on a single topology. These models are not capable of producing different topologies at once. If we want to model like really wide clothing, like skirts, this is going to be also a problem with vertex displacements. And if we want to model like general objects, like laptops or tables and so on, with a single vertex-based model, it's not going to be possible because you cannot obtain every possible object in the world by just applying vertex displacements to a main shape. So these are the main limitations of these vertex displacement models. So basically, the conclusions are that clothing is much harder than modeling undressed bodies. You have to think of the representation, how to do registration, image fitting, how to build the model. Like you have to think whether you build a model for each garment category or you build a joint model. You have to deal with topology issues, texture, cuts, geometries, and so on. So vertex-based models require registration of the training data, which we've seen is difficult, but it does bring advantages. And mesh-based parametric models like Simple are powerful, and they are easy to use and control, and they are compatible with graphics pipelines, but they are limited to one topology per model, and this is hard to produce, and they are hard to train to produce detail. So the next lecture, we're going to see how to address some of these issues with implicit surface models of clothing. And it's not going to be a win-all technique, because we're going to gain in terms of detail and in terms of flexibility to produce different topologies. We're going to lose a little bit in terms of control and in terms of memory consumption. And it's nowadays, implicit surface models are more popular, but I'm not 100% sure that they will completely displace the vertex-based models, because I think there's some advantages to them, like for example, like this ability to control, to map clothing from one body to another, or change the texture, or plug them into computer graphics pipelines. That to me is not clear that these implicit surface models, that it's not clear they have these advantages. All right, so this is all I wanted to talk about vertex-based clothing models. These are the main papers in this lecture. There's many more papers. These are mostly based on the works coming from my group and collaborators. But you can check the references of those papers. There's many more papers on that topic. All right, so yes, if you want to play with some of these models, they are you can find them under the following link. And this is all I wanted to discuss about vertex-based clothing models. In the next lecture, we'll see neural implicits to represent surfaces implicitly with a neural network. All right, thank you. Bye-bye.